What's going on, everybody? I am back with the tier list video, and I'm going to be doing it alone because, well, nobody loves me, I guess. But yeah, we're back with the tier list. This is going to be for the entire game, talking about everything, every role when it comes to conquest, of course. And this, like most of my tier lists, takes into account like competitive, ranked, and maybe even some casuals and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. And as always with my tier list, guys, you gotta take everything with a grain of salt. You know, I play at a top level, so if you're a little bit lower, then it may not completely apply to you. But this is a pro player / experienced player's perspective on the meta right now with all the gods and everything. I'll give a very detailed explanation on every single character and why they are where they are when it comes to the meta, the builds and stuff like that, and why it's important. But remember, like, if you enjoy a character that's in C tier and you think they're, you know, more like an A tier character or maybe an S tier, and you're doing well with them, keep playing them. You know, comfortability is very important in MOBAs and games in general. So, you know, just keep doing what you're doing, but, you know, keep the things in mind that I talk about for, you know, your picks and bans and going throughout your games and just kind of why. I think when it comes to tier lists, especially my tier list, really all it is an excuse to talk about each character, their builds, and why they are where they are in the meta. So keep that in mind. It's basically just an excuse to talk. If you guys enjoy talking, then should be good. I'm doing this in one take. My tier lists are usually pretty dang long, but we're going to try and speed run through it while also giving you guys a lot of details. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. So I looked at this tier list. I was trying to find a good tier list to do that was already like pre-made or whatever, and this one was the best one that I could come up with. Like, a lot of the ones didn't have like the newer god releases like Tiamat and Morgan and stuff like that, but this was the only one that had it. The only character I believe that is missing from this tier list is Gilgamesh. I hope so. That's the only new character that I saw missing. So we'll just go ahead and start with Gilgamesh. Even though he's not here, I'll just, you know, make a quick note of him and you guys can notice that. So Gilgamesh is S tier. He's one of the best junglers in the game. He's very overtuned. His ultimate is insane. It's such a big circle, and it does quite a bit of damage. It's a really good initiation, and it's really hard. The big thing about Gilgamesh ultimate is that it's so big and it's so threatening with the root and the slow and the damage that it does that it's really hard for carries to ever walk into it. So it's a super good zoning ultimate. Obviously, he's very good in the jungle. And part of the reason he's S tier, maybe not a little bit lower, is that he can be flexed. He's good in jungle. He's pretty good in solo. And he's also viable as a support, in my opinion. So he's a very good flex pick. So that brings him up even higher. I wouldn't say he's quite S+, because I think he does have some counters and he can be beaten. I don't think he's that insane. You know, such as like an Awilix. Awilix is really good into him. He has no CC immunity, so you can always punish his leap. Any character with a lot of CC, like an Ares, is going to punish him. You know, knock up immunity on the 3, so that's good against Gilgamesh, and then also the cripple plus ult. So stuff like that. He has counters, and usually S+ characters don't really have counters, like we're going to talk about. So Gilgamesh S tier for sure. Very good as a flex pick. So now we're just going to go through in alphabetical order. Gilgamesh S tier, obviously. Starting with Achilles, of course. Achilles, as usual, is just an A tier character. Very balanced. Really not that great. You know, the biggest thing about him is that he can't really lose lane in solo, and he can be flex picked, especially if they have like a Khepri support. And Khepri is seeing a little bit more play right now, so he may move up maybe to like an A+ S tier character if Khepri is very dominant in this meta. That is starting to shape up with Sentinel's Embrace and stuff like that after Benevolence getting nerfed. But for the most part, he's just an A tier character. You know, his biggest strength is his execute, which can be blocked. You know, it's very easy to block, can be healed, and it can also be missed, even though it's kind of an easy ability to hit, but sometimes, you know, sometimes you'll just miss. So yeah, pretty much quintessential A tier character right now, in my opinion. I don't really like playing him in solo. I think there's just so many other characters that offer so much more, especially when it comes to late game. I feel like Achilles falls off very hard late game unless you're full damage in your power stance with like Hydra's procs or something like that. And that's what, you know, they need to be playing him in the jungle. So decent as a jungler, but it is what it is. Agni, honestly, pretty bad character. I would say B tier. Not quite C tier because he's good with a lot of the items. He's good with like Soul Gem, Soul Reaver, Karen's Coin, just like these items that are really meta. They're kind of dictating the mage meta right now, and we'll talk about that throughout the entire video. But Agni is really, really bad. I think his ultimate sucks. You know, his bombs, they're like, I don't know, they're so buggy. Sometimes you'll use them, you'll spam them, and they won't even go off. They'll say they go, like they'll do the whole animation, but then you still have the bomb available, but it doesn't actually do any damage. They're buggy. They're not really that great compared to other characters. His clear is still really rough because you have to walk up all the way to the wave and clear. And his 2 is really hard to reach, like everything. I guess his best thing is that he has setup. He can set up for himself and for his teammates with his range stun, either through his bomb or his 2 stun, but he's just not worth it. No CC immunity as well, which is really, really rough, especially with all the viable mages right now. You're going to see there's like 4 or 5 really OP mages that there's just no reason to pick a character like that. He's been power creeped very, very hard. Just not worth it. So speaking of another bad mage, Aposh. So Aposh has some really good things about him. He's got the anti-heal. He's got very hard to miss abilities. He's got really insane secure and good objective play with his big zoning abilities, but he's just so bad. Like Agni, no CC immunity, so he's very easy to punish. A lot of the meta characters right now can just punish him super hard and dive him really hard, especially these like really high pressure junglers. It is so hard to get away with an Aposh in this meta where people are playing Osiris jungle, Gilgamesh jungle, Erlang jungle. Like these characters that can just dive him so hard early game and put him behind. And even then, it's like even if you're behind on Aposh, the late game isn't like that much worth it that you would like be willing to get behind early game. So just very easy to punish. I will say his one benefit is that he has all that anti-heal. So if we get into a meta where it's like a ton of Yamoja, a ton of Helmid, a ton of like all these sustained characters, Guan Yu solo, then maybe you'll see him played a little bit more. But I think they need to change a good bit more about him. Ama. So Ama right this second, it isn't too great. So I'd probably put her in like B+, but she's getting some buffs. She's getting some buffs next patch as well in the coming patch. The items that she has that are really good with her, like Berserkers, Shoguns, those got buffs recently, are in a pretty good spot and are part of the reason that Bellona's in a good spot. Honestly, I think this character is maybe a little bit underrated. I'm going to throw her in A preemptively, especially with the new buffs coming to her. I think she's pretty good in solo right now. I like the build, like I said, with the Berserkers and Shoguns and stuff like that. Frostbound is getting nerfed, and that's one of her best items, so that's kind of rough. But with this meta right now, where you can get away with these like mid to late game characters in solo, especially if you go like tier 2 ranked and then later on in the game get an animosity on a character like this, it's just insane when it comes to late game, and you're just still super tanky and output a lot of damage. So you kind of want that auto attack build with the animosity late game on her, so you don't fall off too hard. But I think this character is actually in a pretty good spot, maybe a little bit underplayed right now. I would say A for sure. AMC as well is another one of these characters that maybe a little bit underplayed just because he's so easy to punish, especially when it comes to like the team fights. Just no CC immunity like these other characters, and obviously has no but instant escape like a lot of the meta characters. But the thing is, I think AMC is really good, especially with the bow build. He's insane with Oboe Silverbranch. He gets so much attack speed from his one that Silverbranch is insane on him, and that's a pretty good item right now. I think that this character probably should be played a little bit more in ADC. I'll put him in B+, lower him just one tad bit, just because, like I said, when it comes to late game, it's just like, I don't know, it's just really rough for a character like this. Gets dove very, very hard. His lane actually isn't that bad. Like, he wins a lot of lanes, and he's also kind of hard to gank because of all the movement speed he gets from his one, especially if you max it, which you probably should. Most good AMC players max their one these days, but he still suffers from the same problems. But B+, when it comes to the tiers on this, S+ is like the best character in the game. C is like the worst character in the game. The tiers don't really matter that much, but when I think of B+, I think B+ as the good counter pick tier. That's where I put like my counter picks, or if you pick them in the right scenarios, into these counter pick scenarios, you'll do really well. And that's why I see AMC as a B+. On her, falling off a little bit, but still pretty much A tier. You can kind of pick him every game, especially in ranked, and not really struggle too much. Very safe. He's got the jump. He's got the CC immunity that lasts a while. Just kind of like an A tier character. Doesn't thrive as much as he did in the past few patches. And just because some of these some of these other hunters are better with the build, like especially right now, attack speed steroid characters are really good with the Silver Branch, and people are building crit as well. And crit's fine on her, but he doesn't really excel more than any of these hunters with these builds. And just like some of these other characters also got buffs, something like a Chiron, for example. And Anhur is not too good into Chiron. That's one of the reasons that he fell off, is Chiron became super meta, and then Anhur's not very good against that. At least now that the Chiron doesn't have, or now that Chiron does have knockup immunity on his 3. Anubis, I would say a little bit stronger than C. I think he has a bit stronger of a payoff, but it's pretty much in line with Agni. Does have CC immunity, but it has no escape. And we're not talking about Ares, haha. Just not that great of a character. Decent with the builds because lifesteal is pretty strong right now, especially with lifesteal on Spear of the Magus, which is a really nice item for Anubis. But, he always suffers from the same problems. Has to sit still to use 2 of his abilities. And that's very, very easy for these very high burst mages in the meta and hunters as well to just own him, And if you just go anti-heal and go characters that are good at diving him, then he is going to have a very, very rough time. He's very one-dimensional and, just kind of B tier. A little bit more payoff than Aposh, though, because I think one upside that Anubis has is he shreds objectives. So if you're able to one-shot an objective, then you can maybe win the game with him. Ao Kuang, maybe a little bit underrated in the jungle. I would say B+, stronger than these characters. I think he's decent, especially when it comes to ranked. This character can actually carry games in ranked from the jungle. And he has that benefit where he's a magical jungler, so then if you have a physical soul lane or you have that magical physical damage split when it comes to ganking the soul lane or 2v2ing in the soul lane side of the map with the solo jungle. So that's actually a really strong benefit of him. Some of the items are pretty good right now, like Telekines is insane, and that's very good on him. Even in solo, maybe this character is slightly underrated. But yeah, he just has that potential to just get so many kills in the early game, just run to lanes and gank, get kills on the support if they don't have beads or CC immunity in their kit, just because he can execute them, and then he can snowball games. So I think this character is B+. If this was just a competitive tier list, I would put Ao Kuang even lower, just because when it comes to competitive, he gets a lot less value because people aren't just dying to these ganks on cooldown for the most part. So, but when it comes to ranked and casuals, this character is pretty good. So C tier in competitive, A in ranked and casuals, but combination of both, probably around B+. Aphrodite got some nerfs after she saw a ton of play last year. I think she's kind of underrated as well. Healers are a little bit stronger now. These like builds where you can go like Rada 280 first item, that's an insane item for Aphro because it increases her damage, but it also increases her healing to her teammates when they're below 50%. So it's actually a really nice item. Items like Karen's Coin that give you everything that you want, MP5, HP5, they give you your pen that you need for the rest of the game, your power. Like an item like that is probably pretty good on Aphro as well. So yeah, I think this character may be slightly underrated, but definitely is maybe more in line than she was in the past. Maybe the past couple years she was played a lot, especially in mid, and she's very frustrating. Apollo was seeing a ton of play. He's being played in every role in in ranked, but mostly in jungle, and he was doing insane. But they made a huge nerf to Apollo in a recent patch. I don't remember which patch it was, but they made his ult cost so much more mana. So you literally need Transcendence to be able to ult on this character nowadays. If you don't have Transcendence, you're going to go if you just ult from dual lane to like a mid team fight. It's insane how much mana it uses now. And that single change brought him from like an S tier character being played in every role in ranked to more like a B tier character, honestly. I don't know if you guys saw the recent SPL set. Johnny, the Valkyrie's jungler, played this and went 0-12. Not to BM him. You know, it was a rough game and he was running it down. I respect it. I respect the running it down, but if you want to go watch it, he was inting. He was definitely inting. So yeah, this character has fallen off quite a bit, even though he's pretty good with the builds right now. You know, obviously with his attack speed steroid on his passive, you overcap 100% or whatever you get your attack speed steroid for 100%. You can overcap a ton and get a ton of Silver Branch procs. Still, even with the build being good for him, he's just fallen off so much. Arachne, another pretty horrible character. This character just, I don't know, it's just so hard for her to be meta unless they just absolutely, I don't know, make her numbers insane, make them ridiculous. This character just can't be good. All of her abilities are single target. Her 3 can be interrupted by like a tank, and it doesn't even chase the people you want it to. Her 2 is single target, and you have to actually connect the 3 autos. Her 1 is okay, but obviously can be countered by anti-heal. And then her ultimate is just like her only, I guess, it's not even her great ability. That's the thing. I guess her 3 is her best ability because you can do cheese stuff with her early game. So when it comes to like casuals, you can win games with this character just because you can cheese the early game so hard, and your early game is pretty good with the slow and the, just running people down. But the thing is, this character is just, if you know how to play against her, she is so horrible. And come late game, she literally won't be able to play the game. You have to have blink to do anything late game. And then if you do blink in, you're just going to get one shot because you're only hitting one person. And if they just beads it or Aegis it, you're just screwed. This character needs a rekit in order to be good at a top level at least. And she's pretty bad. Ares, I honestly think Ares is A+. I wouldn't say he's like quintessential, just like completely balanced. I think that he's really good as a counter pick. B+ is like good as a counter pick, but Ares is like really sick as a counter pick, especially with some of these characters that don't have CC immunity in their kit, such as like a Gilgamesh, like I mentioned before, and he's very, very meta. So very good in those scenarios. I think he's really good. Still does insane damage, very safe. The HP 5 that they added to his 2 is like kind of sneak OP, and he's just a really strong character, especially with the aura items right now. You have Thieves, Sovereignty, Heartward are all viable. Then you can go Sentinel's Embrace now that Compassion isn't the go-to anymore because Benevolence got kind of, hard scuffed. So now Sentinel's Embrace is really strong, and that makes Ares even stronger, especially when you combine it with the Prots and the CCR and the HP 5 that you get from your 2. If you just Deathball with this character, he's very strong. Artemis, S tier character. Not quite S+, but they have buffed Artemis quite a bit over the past few years. In a recent buff, they buffed her mana cost, I think, pretty recently. They buffed the cooldown on her trap from I think it scaled to like 16 seconds. It was the cooldown, but now it's just a flat 10 seconds. You can trap so often in lane. This character is no longer just like such an easy kill because of the trap cooldown. And then the items are really good for her, even if crit becomes more of the meta, which it kind of is right now. And that's still a really good build for her. It doesn't even matter. Silver Branch, obviously really good. She has one of the biggest attack speed steroids in the game. She benefits from that with the Silver Branch and Oboe build and everything. This character is insane, one of the best ADCs. And when it comes to the meta right now, it's dominated by ADCs and mages. Their builds are insane. They do so much damage late game, and there's so much farm on the map, and the removal of boots has just accelerated them so much that at the 20-minute mark, these characters, these mages and these hunters are hitting so hard and just like kind of carrying the game. So that's something you got to keep in mind. And obviously Artemis does a lot of damage when it comes to late game. So that being said, Artemis S tier. Artio getting some buffs in the next patch. Right now, not too great. Can just be countered way too often by a lot of these characters. She has no CC immunity. She can be crippled out of her only escape. Doesn't really have a lot of immunity in it. You can even root it, which is the sad part about it. Long animations, just a ton of abilities that don't really all do that much. It's not like Arthur where he just has such good CC and can just do so much damage with these abilities. She's kind of just like a worse Arthur, and of course, she's magical, so it's a little bit different. But for the most part, this character isn't that great. She is getting some pretty good buffs. Her 1 is going to 10 seconds in the next patch from 12 seconds. And then her dash is also going up to 100% movement speed instead of 75% movement speed. So that's pretty nice. That actually might make her a little bit better. But I wouldn't say she's quite like one of the worst characters in the game, because you can just pick this character in a lot of scenarios and just spam your buttons, especially in these counter pick scenarios where you're like, I don't know, countering like Fenrir is a really good pick right now. So that's something. Herc is a pretty decent pick. You can counter him pretty hard. There's a lot of characters that she does counter with her cripple and her stuns, but for the most part, just kind of like B+, but it is what it is. Athena, I personally think this character is pretty underrated. She was insane a few patches ago, when they added the taunt damage and everything, and then they've slowly nerfed it down to pretty low damage. But I think this character is really good, especially in solo. I think she's a decent character, but still I think viable in jungle, in my opinion. Definitely still viable in support. You can kind of impact the map, which is really good right now, just because there's so many things to do on the map. There's like the Draugr, there's all these new camps that they've added, that it's really good to have her so she can just ult over to like all these fights that are appearing out of nowhere, just because there's so much farm to be had. So pretty good in those scenarios. Good as a flex pick as well. Does suffer against some of the meta picks like Ymir. Ymir can just wall her off and kind of own her. So that's something you got to think about. And obviously, Athena always has the problem if you dash in and that's your initiation, it's really hard for you to get away. So a lot of people can kind of just turn on her and kill her. But definitely viable and pretty good and very valuable for her global. Woolix, I'd say B+. Doesn't really make great use of the jungle items right now. Not that great with mannequins. Is more of a counter pick, and that's why B+ I think is a good spot for her. She's pretty good in those scenarios where you counter pick like a Gilgamesh or like a Fenrir jungle, which are both pretty meta right now. So in that scenario, she can be decent, but just not great with the jungle starts, unfortunately, and isn't like that super run it down like mannequins, Erlang, Osiris kind of god that is kind of running the meta. Serket's also pretty meta right now, and she's pretty good in that, so that's something you got to think about. But for the most part, just used as a counter pick, nothing great. Baba Yaga, we're getting into these mages that are just insane right now. Baba Yaga, I mean, the meta is dominated by mages and hunters, like I said, so you're bound to see some of these mages be in the top tier. Baba Yaga went from one of the worst characters in the game. They've made a ton of changes and buffs to her, and in a meta where there's a lot of stacking items that you can go. And the fact that you don't need boots, you can just literally rush those stacking items, have your movement speed, and then just keep stacking them super fast. Baba Yaga is insane. The items are really good with her. Warlock, Soul Gem, Karen's Coin, which you're going to be stacking. Just all these items are insane. She procs them really well. Her damage is nuts, especially on her ult. Come late game, you are going to one-shot people, and you can honestly reach carries with it. It's like an artillery ability. It's quite insane. So Baba Yaga is definitely S tier, one of the best mages right now. And Ansile is no longer the meta on junglers. If Ansile was meta, you would see this character go down a bit, just because Ansile literally stops your 3. If you 3 with somebody having Ansile near you, the silence will stop your 3 from even going out and put it on cooldown. So that's really big. It's a nice counter to her, but Ansile definitely not as good anymore. So S tier character in this meta. Bacchus, we're throwing in B. There's no real reason to pick this character over any other support these days. Most characters like Yamoja and Fafnir are able to do their CC from a safe distance and, still have other abilities to kind of mess around with. But Bacchus literally has to go in to initiate, and he can get turned on so fast, similar to an Athena. Even though he is pretty tanky, it's just not worth it. His damage, Bacchus used to be like the damaging guardian support that you just do a lot of damage. But compared to all these other supports these days, like Yamoja, Fafnir, even like Terra, it's just not worth it. These characters are so much better at what he does. All these characters I just mentioned, and they do other things like Yamoja heals. Fafnir has insane steroids for his team fight. Terra has heals and like this insane like CCs with the walls and everything. So Just not worth it. Just kind of a B tier character. One thing he does have is the anti-illness 3, but yeah. Bakasura, I think another C tier character. I think if you pick this character in like gold level ranked, you'll probably do decent on him just because you hold left click and people don't really have to think. But if you're playing against anybody who knows what they're doing, one thing I will say is that Shell getting chains to the block stacks actually help Baka a lot, but it still doesn't matter. You could still go the upgraded Shell and it's still really good against Baka. So yeah, I think this character is pretty horrible. Just throwing a Witchblade into a build when you see him on the map. Come late game, he won't do anything. It's very hard for him to stick to people, especially in the meta like I talked about where mages and hunters dominate. If a Baka blinks in on a mage right now who has a soul gem proc up and has 6 items, he will do literally nothing. He'll get one shot by the mage, and it's the jungler's job to dive the backline. If he can't dive the backline, then he's bad, and Baka is just unable to do that. Baron. I see Baron as a decent counter pick in the solo lane. I think he's maybe a little bit underrated in mid as well, but it is what it is. Maybe he's not that underrated just because the meta is dominated by these pretty high pressure mages that can do their damage from a safe distance and have escapes, and Baron doesn't have that. But I like him as a counter pick in solo. 2 characters that are pretty prevalent right now are Osiris, either in jungle or solo, and Zhonghui, which is a pretty good pick in solo right now. And Baron is really good against both of them. They're very bad against him because they can't really, without using ultimates, they can't get out of his root, so he can poke them really hard, and they also can't get out of his ult unless the Osiris ults away or if they use beads. So very strong against that, but he's mainly a counter pick. That's why he's around B+, but he's good in those scenarios specifically. And since those characters are so meta, I would say that Baron probably B+. Very good for that reason. Bastet, not that great. I think Bastet's a little bit stronger than these C-tier characters. She just doesn't make good any use of the starter items right now. Mannequins is dominating the meta. She cannot use mannequins for one. She maybe late game can deal with these carries because she does so much damage, but it's so hard to get there. She's just going to get run down by all these meta characters. We're talking the Fenrir, the Cyrus, the Erlangs, the Gilgameshes, like all these characters, even like Serket. They're just going to make it so hard for this character to get out of the early game. So she's just bad. Her payoff isn't even there because you can't even get there. So Bastet, pretty straightforward, B tier. Although I will say I'm sad about her rework. I think it's been enough time for us to be 100% objective and say that the rework was so horrible for Bastet. She just became an ult bot. And even then, it's like her ult's so lame. There's some characters in Smite that are ult bots that are like, it's actually fun because their ults are cool and they interact with their kit a lot, but Bastet, no. Bologna. I think Bologna is actually pretty good now. I would put Bologna in A+. I think a lot better. Obviously, now that Berserkers is working as intended, it has the stats that it's supposed to. She's really good with Animosity. I think she fell off a little bit now that Benevolence isn't as good because you actually felt good just building Benevolence after tier 2 ring does on Bologna and solo. But you gotta have a character to be able to deal with these hunters right now, man. They just are swinging come late game, and Bologna with Animosity can do that. She can actually just straight up 1v1 ADCs late game. One of the few characters that can. So I think she's pretty strong for that reason. Her lane is pretty good with tier 2 ring does. She has a lot of pressure because she out clears people pretty easily, out trades them pretty easily as well, which is the crazy part. And the crazy part as well is that Bologna is getting even more buffs in the coming patch. She's getting a cooldown buff, I think, on her 1 and a cooldown buff, I think, on her 3. And Bologna's cooldowns are pretty long. So the fact that they're changing those, making them a little bit better, is pretty insane. I'm not going to lie. So Bologna, like I said, A+. Actually, for the first time in a long time, in a pretty good spot. Cabrakan as well, I think, is in a pretty good spot. I think this character is heavily underrated in the solo. I played it in the SPL pretty recently. I played it twice in the SPL now. And I think this character is pretty sick in solo, especially with the build. If you go like a Tyrannical and do a Breastplate, it is impossible for physicals to fight you. You out-pressure pretty much most viable solo laners. Some range characters will out-pressure you just because it's hard for you to walk up to the wave when they're hitting you, from range and you're trying to tremor it. But this character, I think, is really good. Really good into a lot of the meta picks because he can wall them off. Yeah, I think this character is pretty sick, mainly as a solo laner, but he's always at least viable as a flex pick when it comes to the jungle and the support. He's played a little bit differently there, but I see this character as like a really good magical warrior right now. And he's very good in certain scenarios where you're going to wall off their carries so you can actually deal with them, or just wall off people on the map. And like I said, it's very hard to fight into a Cabrakan with Vampiric, Tyrannical, Breastplate. He's so tanky. He heals so much from the wave, and it's even hard. It's hard to even clear the wave against his character because of the Tyrannical. Kama, not that great. Fell off as a solo laner, mainly because most assassins fell off as solo laners right now just because they can't go tier 2 Rangdas, and tier 2 Rangdas is pretty insane. So most assassin solos are pretty bad. He's still pretty good in the jungle, I would say, at least decent. He's one of the few assassins I think that can deal with all these warriors right now, just because he has so much sustain. He can kind of keep up with their early game, and you know, he can snowball pretty hard. And also, come late game, I think most junglers are pretty useless right now with their builds and what they have to do in the early game and the pressure they have to put on the map. But he's one of the few characters I think can pressure out the map early game and not be completely useless late game, because if you go full damage, you blink, get your 2 abilities off, and then go into the air, you're going to do a decent amount of damage. You're not going to die because you're going to be in the air, right? So something to keep in mind with him. But, you know, his flex pick potential has fallen off quite heavily, and I would say he's just pretty meh. Serb, I think another pretty strong character. Very good flex pick, good in support, and really good in solo right now. Very good into a lot of these like meta picks, like Odin. He's good into a lot of these like healer comps that people are running, Yamoja and Terra, which are very good right now. He's good into, obviously steals their healing, reduces their healing, very strong. And he's good with the build. I think tier 2 ranked is into Warrior's Axe on this character. You steal so much health, not only through the Warrior's Axe, but also the healing from your passive. You just have a ton of sustain in lane, and it allows you to go Sundering Axe late game, and that solves Serb's late game problem. Before, as a soul laner, if you rotated over to a fight at 20-25 minutes, not really rotated, but if you were just participating in a fight at 20-25 minutes as a soul laner, as a soul lane Serb, it's really hard for you to do anything. You just fall off super hard. It's really hard to hit your CC for the most part, especially if there are beads up for your ult. But now with Sundering Axe, this character does so much damage and heals so much. It's very, very tanky. So combine the Sundering Axe with a Pridwin, combine that with your base damage, plus if you go Thorns, which you probably should, or throw a Sunder in there instead, Blink Thorns, Blink Sunder. This character is very strong late game, and that kind of solves the problem, because before he was strong early to mid, but he was really bad late. Now, not so much. I think this character is really good. A+ is where I'd put him. Cernanos, I wouldn't say quite C tier. I don't think he's that horrible, but honestly, kind of like these other characters that are down here, no CC immunity, very easy to interrupt dash. It's very slow, very telegraphed. This character is so easy to dive, so easy to kill, especially when you get characters with long CC immune ultimates like Cthulhu's, or stuff like Vamana, which is decent right now. Guan Yu, like, you can just run down this character. He's way too easy to kill. He can't really stand his ground into these tanks late game, especially if you go like Thorns and just run him down. And he can be countered by, something as simple as like Gilgamesh or Fenrir, 2 really prevalent characters right now. Absolutely destroy this character. It's very, very hard to ever get away with Cern, and it's just not worth it. So Chalk, I actually think, I say this about a lot of the characters, about them being underrated, but I don't know. It's just that his late game is so bad. He can't really like dive the backline for that long. He'll just die, and then he can't get away because his escape is so bad. But I think that you can pick Chalk in every single one of your ranked or casual games and just never lose lane. It's impossible for this character to lose lane, so that's why I would say that he's at least B+. But for the most part, he just doesn't really offer all that much, and he's always suffered from the same problem. Just come to mid to late game, he cannot dive that long, and he can't get away. So you just don't even buy time. It's not even worth it to play him. Chang'e, I would also throw in B+. I think as a soul laner, you can go like a Tyrannical build on her. Tyrannical, let's just throw in a random build. Tyrannical, Lotus Crown, Genji's, Ratatouille. Like, those are your first 4 items, and you would be very strong with this character. I promise you that. Ratatouille for your healing and for your damage. Tyrannical in the lane with Chang'e. If you heal your minions, it's going to be absurd and very, very obnoxious for the enemy solo to even lane. So it's definitely good in lane, but definitely just falls off a little bit. Isn't gonna do exactly what you want as a soul laner right now. It's not gonna dive the backline. You need characters to dive the backline to deal with these mages and these hunters that are just gonna run the team fights if you don't. So Chang'e's not great at that, and for that reason, it's fallen off a little bit as a soul laner, and isn't as good as a mid laner for the same reason. You kind of want characters that can just spit out damage, and Chang'e doesn't exactly do that, at least from a safe distance, like a lot of other mages. Chernobog, I would say A tier, pretty good. Obviously, his global is very, very strong. He's a lot better when the crit is meta, and I think crit's a little bit better now, so probably just around A tier. I think struggles in some lanes because he can get out pressure a little bit. He always has the benefit of being able to ult back to lane and trying to 1v1 the ADC, so that's something that is nice about him, but for the most part, just not that great, but also not that bad. Kind of just viable. He can be pretty safe, though, because he can dash into walls, so that's pretty nice. Chiron was an insane pick before, but has fallen off quite hard because people found out counters for him. And you know what the main thing is? You can't pick Chiron anymore because of Odin. Odin absolutely destroys Chiron. Not only does Odin have the knockup immunity on his 3 for all of Chiron, for all of his self peel, I guess, because of his dash, but also because he can just cage him, and Chiron gets owned by that. So because of that, Chiron has fallen off very, very heavily. Also isn't that great when it comes to the meta build. Isn't that great with Silver Branch and all the bows because he doesn't have attack speed throws, so that doesn't help him at all. And Bluestone as a starter item for ADCs has fallen off, not only because they nerfed it, it's now down to 12 power instead of 15 power. That's pretty bad, but also because of the builds with leather cow and everything being so strong. So this character has fallen off quite heavily. I would honestly say he's probably B+ for the Odin reason and for the meta builds and everything like that. Kronos, I think, maybe slightly underrated as well. Pretty good with the mage items. He just puts out a ton of damage. The only problem, of course, with this character is that his only escape is, I guess, movement speed, and I guess his ultimate rewind. But that's pretty telegraphed, and you can always kind of go where it's going to go. But Fafnir is pretty meta, so Kronos mid with the Fafnir is really, really strong. I wouldn't quite say he's A probably, though. I'd probably say he's B+. And I'd probably put Chiron in A just because Chiron still has, he still has his strength. And as long as Odin is in the game, he's a little bit stronger. So we'll flip those around on second thought, and that's where we put him. Cthulhu, I think, is actually pretty good. One of the better magical soul laners right now. I'd say he's A+. Another one of these few characters that can deal with these hunters and mages late game, especially if you go Thorns. You're just really, really tanky in the late game on Cthulhu, and if you have Thorns, it's really hard for them to return the damage on you, especially if you go a little bit anti-heal plus upgraded Thorns. They're not just going to be sitting there life-stealing off of you while you hit them. So yeah, I think he's decent in lane. You can pretty much stalemate every single lane as Cthulhu because you're so tanky. If you go tier 2 Rangdas and a Warrior's Axe, then you can look forward to a Sundering Axe late game, which is really strong on him and heals you for a lot. So his late game isn't that bad. And combine Sundering Axe with Thorns and all of your base damage, Cthulhu can be killing people late game. So one of the few characters. Cuckoo, I would say probably S tier. Probably the best warrior solo right now, in my opinion. Maybe tied, at least when it comes to like ranked and casuals, tied with like an Osiris. Or an Odin when it comes to the solo lane. I think that's the only role he's viable in, but he's so strong still there that I think he's probably S tier. They did nerf him pretty recently, but it doesn't matter. His pressure is still insane. He can always fight. If you manage your rage as much as you should, or the way you should, you're just transforming nonstop, getting pressure off of it. You can fight every time. If you go the build where you go tier 2 Rangdas plus Warrior's Axe and then get Sundering Axe late game, which is what you should be doing, then your late game is insane. You do so much damage, especially if you go Blink Thorns. If you have to go Bees because they have a ton of CC, then so be it. But for the most part, if you go Blink Thorns or Blink Sunder on this character in late game with Sundering Axe, you're insane. You're very, very strong as a tank. So I think this character is strong early, mid, and late, at least with the right build. Cupid, counter pick, I'd say B+. He's good as a counter pick. In a lot of scenarios where they can't don't have CC immunity or are gonna get crippled out by the ultimate. Gilgamesh, very good in it. Cupid's very good into. But there's also characters that are meta that are pretty good into him, such as like Ares or like Kabrakan, which I think is pretty good. Artemis, for example. Artemis has slow immunity on her 2, plus her ultimate just kind of destroys Cupid. So you got to pick him in the right scenarios. And in those right scenarios, he can be very strong. He can literally win games but just by being so hard to dive because people are relying on their escapes and everything. No CC immunity. But, it just has to be the right scenario. So that's why he's B+. Daji. I would also say B+. Another counter pick character that can get a lot of value when they don't have CC immunity. She can just dive like a mid laner who doesn't have CC immunity in their kit, or an ADC, get her damage off, go into the air and not have to worry. She's one of the few characters that can do that, and that is a very, very strong thing to have, but B+ and not higher, because all these mannequins characters, these high pressure characters, are just going to dominate her early game and make it hard for her to get out of the early game, similar to Bastet, but the payoff is just a little bit better than her. So Dante Brew, I would say probably A+. Pretty strong ADC right now, good into Chiron. That's part of the reason Chiron fell off. Decent into some of these other meta picks, and has a ton of CC, so that's something you got to look forward to. Can combo off a lot of support, not stuns, but CC in general, and that's really good CC chain. Also a really good escape. For some reason, his rocket goes so far. It literally goes across the entire world, and I have no idea why, but it's very good initiation. It's good for rotations. You can like run from the jungle into a lane and just instantly gank somebody with the rocket and just stun them and do a ton of damage. Absurd, honestly. I'd say Disco is A tier. She's a mage that kind of spits out damage, like kind of sneakily, a little low key about it, She can just throw out random 2s and hit multiple people, and it'll proc. She's good with the items, Soul Gem, Karens, like everything. Soul Reaver, Ratatouille, whatever items you're going, Spear of Deso, Spear of the Magus, everything is good on her. She can make use of pretty much every magical item, besides, I guess, the tank items or the auto attack items. But Also good at impacting the side lanes because of her passive. That's always something that's going to be valuable about her, is that she can, you know, give her passive to like a solo laner and it can kind of be a trump card in the 1v1, or she can give it to the ADC and be a trump card in the 1v1 or the 2v2. It doesn't matter. So that's strong, and I think that this character is pretty much just a balanced mage, so that's why I would have her in A tier. Not quite the same as these other mages that you're going to see in S and S+, because she doesn't quite put out the same amount of damage as them when it comes to just a rotation of their kit, but, you know. Also, her ult can be body block. That's probably the biggest thing. Erlang, very, very strong right now. I would probably say S tier. One of the best junglers. Very, very good with mannequins. Very good with like the stone cutting build, the Ichavolt build, stuff like that. Items that are pretty prevalent and very good. I would say that he's S tier, probably one of the best junglers in the game. And for that reason, you know, just very, very strong. And can keep up with these other pressure junglers. Can, you know, 1v1 out in Osiris, the Gilgameshes. Something you do have to keep in mind, though, is he can be countered pretty easily just because he has no CC in his kit and he relies on his 3 for his escape, which is, you know, it's not that great and it's very slow, especially his turtle. But it doesn't matter. He just does so much damage right now. Fafnir, S+. Best, I wouldn't say quite the best support in the game because Yemoja, but he's the second best support in the game. You can pick him in every single game and not care. He has insane setup if you hit your abilities, which, I mean, you got to hit your abilities, right? Very, very good in this meta where you can just kind of shred objectives, shred all these things on the map, draw a group for your attack speed steroid, Gold Fury for your attack speed steroid, Fire Giant and Pyromancer for your attack speed steroid. All these objectives with all the items in the game right now with Shoguns. Shoguns is insane right now, which is like one of his best items because it just, you know, it just combos so well with his kit. Insane. Second best support in the game right now. And honestly, should probably is the only reason he's not the best support in the game is because Yemoja is fucking bloated as hell. Like, that character is still absolutely insane for no reason. So yeah, I would say that Fafnir, second best support in the game. The reason I would say he's S+ and not quite like something like an S is that you can pick him in every single game and not care. He's a very safe support as well because he has his jumps and his CC immunity on his ults and stuff. So very, very strong. Fenrir, another very good character. You know what? We'll do this. No, we'll keep it like that. We'll put Fenrir in S. Fenrir very, very strong as a jungler right now. Just has so much pressure. He's good with the build. If you go like Jotun's Pridwin on him into tank, he's very, very strong as like a bruiser character. And he can go a lot of different actives on him as well because he's just so safe with his long CC immunity and his ult. Good into a lot of the meta picks where you can kind of just chase them down with his Brutalize. And yeah, just probably one of the best junglers right now, especially as like a bruiser build. Freya, more of a counterpick character. She's not quite in these horrible state of like C or B tier. And the reason for that is that Artemis is very, very good right now. And Freya is actually one of the few like good picks into her. She can be kind of decent into her. And she's also decent in some of these other mages. Very good with Sacrificial Shroud as well. If you go Vampiric on her, it's really hard to bounce her early game just because of the tankiness Vampiric provides and the sustain. And then come late game, you get all your rings and your Sacrificial. You hit very, very hard. So I think this character is a little bit underrated and probably around B+. Ganesha, I mean, my true opinion when it comes to competitive and like a very, very high level play is that this character is C tier. The only thing is that we're talking about everything. So I'd say he's probably B tier. I mean, like you'll pick this game and do fine with him in your like gold games and stuff like that. But this character is so easy to play around. Like his one is a horrible ability for his support. His dash is so horrible as well. No CC immunity, no immunities on it at all. You can interrupt it so easily. It's so slow. It's so hard to actually guarantee. His only good ability really is his ult. His 2 is okay, but his only like truly good ability is his ult. And it kind of just makes more sense as like a mage ultimate than a support ultimate. You know, it's decent as a zoning ability or something like that, and maybe for getting some damage off in the fight and initiating it. But this character is very easy to play around, kind of like a Kumba in my opinion. And if you just know what you're doing against this character, he is nothing compared to a Fafnir or a Yemoja or an Ares or anything like that. So no reason to pick him. Geb, I would say about B+. Maybe you could argue A. Good into characters like Serket that it's meta. Fenrir, he's really good into because he can counter both these characters with his cleanse from his shield and just counter a lot of their damage. Obviously, it's pretty hard for him to get out of a lot of lanes, you know, especially into like Ares, Fafnir, stuff like that. He can cleanse Fafnir's stun if it's on an enemy, or not an enemy, a teammate. But the problem is if you're playing Fafnir, you're probably just going to stun Geb, Frenzy, and just insta-kill the Geb. It's really hard for him to get out of team fights or be not killed, you know? But very strong as a counter pick, especially if you put him in those right scenarios like I talked about before. So yeah, I'd say he's B plus. You know, if you could get out of every single early game as Geb, you'd probably be A plus or even S tier, but it's just hard for you to do that. And early game is very, very important right now. Guan Yu fallen off a little bit, still very strong. I mean, his healing is really, really, really good. The problem with him right now is he's not good into Odin. Odin's very meta, so that's part of the reason he's fallen off. He's more of an A tier character. Very hard to pick him into Odin because he'll get owned. Serb is also really good, and Serb's good into him. Cuckoo's also really good, and Cuckoo's good into him. Lots of anti-heal on both these characters, which are good for Guan. And then come late game, he doesn't really even do, like, he doesn't do enough damage. He does not do nearly enough damage as like these other characters, especially when they go Sundering Axe. Like, you can go Sundering Axe on Guan and you'll probably feel okay, but for the most part, you can just go these other characters and I think output a little bit more damage late game. And you can play him for his healing, which will always be strong and ranked in casuals because healing is just very hard to deal with in non-coordinated games. But for the most part, I actually think this character is more balanced now and more of like an A tier character. Hachiman, I would say Hachiman's probably A tier as well. I think this is one of these ADCs that you could pick in pretty much every single game and feel happy or at least decent about because it's hard for him to be countered. He's very, very safe with his ultimate, just long CC immunity. Can go very, very far, kind of like a Danza. Can't be blocked, though, like Danza's can. Can be used for initiation as well or following up on your teammates, so that's really nice about him. He's very versatile. And one of the big things about this character is that you don't have to worry about your mana at all because of his passive. So he's viable with a lot of different builds because you don't have to worry about MP5. So you can go different starter items. You can go different like builds, either crit or you can go the bow build. He has an attack speed steroid, so he can make use of Silver Branch. Like, there's a lot of benefits to him, and no real downsides besides not being as strong as other ADCs who bring a little bit more. So that's something to think about. Hades, I don't know. At this point, we should just rework this character. You guys know I'm a Hades main. You guys know I love Hades, but it's just impossible to make this character work right now. It's just sad. He can't even go Rangdas because he's considered a mage. If you could go Rangdas, tier 2 Rangdas on him, it might be kind of nice because then you go an actual good starter item later on. You could still go tier 2 Bancross, but I don't know. It's just not worth it. If you get poked out at all, you can't even heal it because it's hard to walk up to the wave against a lot of these meta characters like Osiris, Cuckoo, and stuff like that. And he's only ever viable in solo. He's not viable as a support. He's never really viable as a mid-mage, especially because you can't output damage from afar like a lot of these mages. At this point, they need to rework him. I think maybe all they need to do is rework his 3. His ultimate's really good, and maybe adjust his 1 a little bit. But his ultimate and his 2 are pretty good abilities, but that just shows you how bad his 3 and his 1 are. Hebo, I would say B+, pretty decent. Can counter certain picks like Gilgamesh. You know, he can 2 out of his ultimate, which is pretty strong. Is good with the build with like Soul Gem. He can go like the lifesteal build, throw into Typhons and stuff like that, and he lifesteals so much, can kind of turn on these junglers diving him. But, you know, like I said before, I'd say that a lot of the mages right now are just meta mages. They can output a lot of damage from a distance, and he is a character that cannot do that. You know, obviously he's very close range and has to use his ultimate to get near people or to one-shot them, so something to keep in mind. But decent as a counter pick and pretty good with the meta builds, and pretty good early game, can out-pressure people, so. Heim, I would say A+, one of the better ADCs. Not quite what he was before, but he's just still so strong. His passive is insane, especially when it comes to comp games, coordinated games. The vision that it gives you, being able to see invisible characters like Loki that are kind of meta right now. Just very, very strong. And then, of course, very, very, very safe. The TP is insane. The CC immunity on his ult, the knock-up immunity on his 2. He just has so much safety in his kit. And also good with the builds. I mean, even though he doesn't have an attack speed steroid, his autos just hit harder than everybody else's and are easier to hit because they're a little bit wider, that it's just, it doesn't even matter for a character like him. He just hits so hard regardless, and very good with Oboe because of that. So yeah, I would say that Heim is pretty much A+, not quite S or S+ like he was before. Can get countered by some hunters and get bullied a little bit, so especially like by an Artemis or something. Trapping in his teleports, something to keep in mind. Hell, saw Variety play her in solo as of today. I recorded this video, which it happened today. So yeah, he was played in solo. She's being played in mid a little bit right now. This character is just so obnoxious. The problem with a character like Hell is that she's either never played or she's always played in ridiculously OP, especially ranked in casuals where healing is hard to deal with, like I said before. I would say this character is A tier right now, maybe even going up. Very good with the meta items like I talked about with Afro. If you go Karen's Coin on this character, you get everything that you want. You get your pen for the rest of the game. You get your MP5, so you never go out of mana. And you get some power for your heals and for your damage. So you could just build whatever you want for the rest of the game. Ratatouille, very good on her. Even Soul Gem is actually a really good item on her, even though it like doubles down on her healing, which can be bad if they build anti-heal. It just doesn't matter because you do so much damage with it and you're still getting some heals off of it. Hera, I would say B+, more of a counter pick character. Seeing a little bit of play in SPL, but you kind of want to build comps around her. And not only that, when it comes to like coordinated play, you can make use of her polymorph for CC chains. So she's a little bit stronger in those scenarios. But as a mage, just across the game when it comes to ranked in casuals, not as strong because she can be dove pretty easily and has no CC immunity in her kit, which is always a downside. Hercules, A+, very good as a soloing right now, can still build the Boombas build, especially if you go tier 2 Ringdas, then build Boombas later on in the game. That's just really nice for him. He's insane late game, very hard to deal with. The healing is ridiculous. And then early to mid, his pressure is pretty hard to match. Like there's very few characters that can even outbox him in lane. Maybe like an Osiris can, or maybe like I don't know, maybe like a Serb or something. But for the most part, he outtrades pretty much everybody because of his passive, so very good in solo. Still pretty good as a support as well. Maybe with the item changes as well, going in like towards like that sentinels and everything, pretty good for him. But for the most part, very good as a solo unit, very good as support, pretty much A+. Not ridiculously OP like the S or S+ characters, but very, very strong. Horus, seeing less and less play lately, but I'd say still pretty good as a counterpick character. He's pretty good into characters like Ymir support or Fafnir support that are really reliant on like trying to kill the frontliner. He's really good at just like going in and then getting out because of his 3. So he's good in those scenarios, and that's why he's a B+ character. But just not quite the same as the Guardians. A lot of these Guardians are just tankier because of Guardian base stats, and maybe do a little bit more, like especially Fafnir, Umoja, Terra. They just do a whole lot more, you know, than something like Horus. If you can make good plays out of his ultimate, then go for it. But for the most part, just not the best character in the world right now. Hu Yi, probably on the lower side of things when it comes to the ADCs. Say he's still like B+. I think most ADCs are at least somewhat viable right now, besides these few exceptions like Cernanos. He's just kind of getting power creeped more and more with these characters. Hasn't really seen, I don't think, many changes or buffs as of recently in the past couple of years. Maybe one here or there. But for the most part, just not that great. Izanami's seeing a little bit more play right now, and he's good in Izanami because the, you know, you can see her when she's invis. But for the most part, not great with the builds as well because he doesn't have an attack speed steroid and doesn't hit harder like a Heim would anyway, you know, so doesn't have the attack speed steroids, so can't make great use of Silver Branch. Not that great with Oboe. He's never that bad. This is a character that you can pick because he does have that quick jump. He can get out of a lot of abilities, escape pretty fast. No CC immunity though, so he can't be countered by stuff like Ares, Serb, Fenrir, stuff like that. So something to keep in mind, but definitely fallen off and been power creeped quite a bit. Hunbats as well, kind of in that B+ territory. Very good when it comes to mid to late game team fights, but it's very hard to get there. You just get out pressured by the Osirises, the Gilgameshes, the Erlings, the Serkets, the Fenrirs, all these really meta junglers right now. You just get out pressured very, very hard. It's very hard for you to get out of the early game, and isn't that great with the items either. You know, you don't really want mannequins on Hunbats, and you can go like Eye of the Jungle or Boombas, but those upgrades are just so much worse nowadays that the payoff isn't quite there. But you know, Hunbat's CC ult, his ult, Fear No Evil, is just very, very good mid to late game, so he always has that value. So counter pick, viable, yes. Iset, not quite so much. Very hard counter by Kurstonk. You go upgrade a Kurstonk against this character every time she ults. It's just ridiculous. Everybody's taking 20% more damage after it, and she can get one shot specifically, but then she's also messing up her team, or she's screwing over her team because now everybody else is taking more damage and not healing at all from her ultimate. So not that good, and very easy to dive, no CC immunity. Only reason you ever pick this character is for her pressure, and she's seen a little bit of play in the jungle, especially like Sino. I think Sino really likes this character, and she does, I think, have more reason to be a jungler than a mid laner just because she has really good gank pressure with all of her CC and walking in the lane. Really good jungle clear as well, so she kind of makes more sense as a jungler, honestly, and maybe if people played her there more, maybe we'd see the light, but for the most part, Iset. Remember, chat, I don't even have a chat. I'm making this video on YouTube, for YouTube, not even live, whatever. Anyway, moving on. Izanami seeing a little bit more play. I'd actually throw Izanami in A tier. One of the big things is that Odin is very, very viable right now. He's one of the best characters in the game right now, and she's very good against Odin because not only can she get out of the cage, but her autos destroy all the walls so easily because she double procs it with her, you know, her AoE autos, whatever you want to call them. And then also it goes through, so she can hit like each wall, multiple walls at once with each auto attack. So very good at killing that. So for that reason, she's very viable, but she's also good with the items. She has the highest attack speed steroid, if I'm not mistaken, in the entire game, at least for hunters. Maybe Mercs is higher for assassins. I'm not really sure. But definitely for hunters, I think hers is the highest. And then that means Silver Branch is really strong on her, which makes Oboe really strong on her because she can proc it so easily with her AoE autos and with her steroid, which will do more damage because she has more Silver Branch stacks. So very, very good, and very good with characters like Fafnir and stuff like that. Shredding objectives, very, very strong. So for the first time in a long time, Izanami in a pretty good spot. Janus, I would say still around A+, still a very good mage. Another character that can output his damage from a distance. The build is a little bit more awkward on him because it's hard to get for him to get all of his pen online. You can go Karens on him, but you want CDR on him. You want more CDR on him than other mages, just because each one of his abilities doesn't hit all that hard unless it's like late game and you're using your ultimate to actually hit some people. But you want to build CDR so you can ult a lot in the early and mid game to rotate to team fights, or just looking for cleanup kills with the ultimate. So, but regardless, the meta build isn't quite the best for him right now in the items, but he's still very, very viable. The change they made to his 2 is insane. It's so easy to hit people with that ability now. It's basically unmissable, and he's still very, very strong. And like I said, can put his damage out from a distance. And his ultimate is a game changer. When it comes to competitive, it's still one of the best ultimates in the game. You can make so many plays off Janus ult. And then ranked in casuals, it's still good for that. Not as much communication and coordination, so it's a little bit harder, but very, very strong right now. Jingwei, I would say B+. Just kind of honestly, let's throw a B for beta. This character is so beta male. All the other ADCs are much more alpha and can all do so much more than her. Have a lot more benefit. The build, I guess, is fine with her, especially like if we're building more crit, then you'll see her a little bit more, but it's not even like she's that great into a lot of the meta picks. She can get away from basically everybody in the game because she's so safe, but there's just no reason to pick her over other characters in my opinion. And can get hard countered by characters like Danza. Danza will just ult on her every single time he sees her in lane and just absolutely destroy her because he has no knockups, so Jingwei doesn't really have any way to deal with him. Moving on to Yorm. Yorm getting some buffs. He's got some buffs recently. He's getting some buffs in the next patch. Honestly, I think after the buffs in the next patch, this character is going to go up a little bit. The Mage, not the Mage, but the Guardian builds right now for solo lane are pretty good. It's really hard to box into Guardians who have Vampiric. And maybe Vampiric isn't the greatest on Yorm, but he can still go the Rangdas and then into Warrior's Axe, and that's very strong on Guardians as well. I think this character may be going to be a little bit better. Right now, I'd say he's probably C or B tier, just because come late game, like you don't do enough damage if you build full damage to just quite one-shot people, and you're just so easy to kill if you're full damage. And if you build full tank, you don't do enough damage to really threaten anybody, and then you don't really have great CC to threaten anybody or setup. And if you go in with your 3, you're just gonna. It's so hard to. The thing about Jorm, here it is. Even with tank items, it's so hard to initiate with your 3 and use any other ability besides your ult. If you initiate with your 3 and then they start turning on you, they start hitting you with the abilities, you can't get your 1 off. You can never get your 2 off come late game because it's so long, it takes so long to actually use. So you're never actually using that. So you're not even doing enough damage to kill people and threaten them. And then you just have to go in your ultimate right away. And it's just not worth it. It's just so not worth it compared to these other characters. But he is getting a ton of buffs recently. So maybe the numbers and everything will just be so busted that he'll be viable again. Kali, I'd say B+ as well. Decent as a counter pick option, but you know, just going to get out pressured very hard in the early game by all the characters I've already talked about that are much more strong in the meta when it comes to the jungle. I would say that she's B+ character, just can't get out of the early game. Come late game, she's decent, but even then it's like the payoff, it's not like her late game is so much better than a lot of these other junglers that you just want to pick her for that. Like even these early game junglers have a decent late game that it's not even worth it for a Kali, you know what I mean? So something to think about. Moving on, Khepri, seeing a little bit more play. I would say he's A tier with Sentinel's Embrace coming back, and maybe this more like, you know, the supports aren't getting as much XP now that Benevolence isn't the go-to item because they nerfed it a lot. So that means that the supports are going to be a little bit more behind. So characters that are a little bit more peely are a little bit better when the supports are behind, because if you're playing characters that are diving, like let's say a Herc support, and are just like running around and trying to kill people and just like diving really hard, they're a lot easier to kill if they're under leveled. So characters like Khepri get a little bit more value when you're death balling. So for that reason, Khepri's a little bit more in the meta, and I would say probably around A tier. Arthur, fallen off quite a bit, but he's not horrible. I would say he's probably around A tier still. Decent as a solo laner, still very, very hard to lose lane as Arthur, but the build is probably the worst it's ever been for him, because it's really hard for him to make use of tier 2 Rangdas. And then Warrior's Axe, he still kind of wants to go Bluestone, and Bluestone's in a pretty bad spot now that it only has 12 power, and the fact that tier 2 Rangdas just outpressures Bluestone by a mile. So it's really hard for Arthur to like do much in this meta with this build. And then I think one of the biggest problems with Arthur, and part of the reason I've kind of stopped playing him, is that if you ever die in the mid game or even the early game, it's really hard for you to regain momentum and get your pressure going again. especially mid to late game. If you die in that one of those fights and you come out of base and there's another fight about to happen, it's basically impossible for you to get energy. Like if you go to a bat camp, you won't get enough. If you go to a few camps, you won't get enough. And you won't have energy for the team fight. Maybe you'll have enough for a stun, and stuns are okay, but not having your big charge ultimate come late game, especially into these mages and hunters that are insane right now, you're just not going to do all that much. So very, very weak. Kukulkan, honestly pretty bad. If the builds were a little bit better for him right now, I'd say he's a little bit higher, because it's not like he's that bad, but this character is really rough right now with the builds because, well, Karen's is good, and he's not very good with Karen's. Soul Gem is really good. He's not really that good with Soul Gem. I guess Spear of the Magus is good, but, you know, he's okay with that. What I'm trying to get at is that there's a lot of items that are meta right now that give you no mana, and Kukulkan relies. He doesn't rely, but he's very, very strong when it comes to having items with mana, you know, Book of Thoth and stuff like that. So you could make him work if you really wanted to, but you can no longer get boots that give you mana. You know, you're not getting boots that have 250 mana on them, or like you did before. So the build's just not that great for him, and of course his only CC is, I guess, a slow on his one, and of course his ultimate, which you're not even using for the CC, you're using it to nuke somebody or peel for yourself. So decent around objectives, still shreds objectives and is very good at securing them, but just not nearly as strong as these other mages, and not worth it because his not his CC, but his damage is much more unreliable than these other mages. Kumba, I would throw in C tier. I know a lot of people disagree with me, especially you guys probably in your gold, platinum, silver games. You can be like, Kumba's such a sick support. He has so much CC is what they say. But if you know what you're doing against Kumba, he's one of the worst gods in the game, in my opinion. He's very, very easy to play against, very easy to play around, not nearly as strong as these other supports that do a million more things and actually put out enough damage to actually kill people by themselves. So yeah, I would say Kumba is one of the worst characters in the game. Disagree if you'd like, but that's just me. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you keep doing you, if you enjoy these characters. Kuzenbo, I would say actually probably around B+. He's more of a counterpick character, pretty good into some of these characters right now, like the Artemis, very, very good. You know, Kuzenbo's good into that because he has a long CC immunity in his ult. Very hard for Artemis to turn on a Kuzenbo and actually outright kill him. But he's a counterpick option for that. And he's also more of a, I mean, he can be flexed a little bit, but he's mostly played in support. He's not that great as a slow laner. Maybe he's a little bit underplayed there because you can go Blink Thorns on him and kind of just dive backlines and do whatever. But his lane is pretty hard to get out of. There's a lot of characters that can kind of just punish him, interrupt his dash, and this, that, and the other. And also not even really that good with like, I think the big thing with him is that his late game, you can't push people through like minions, so his 3 doesn't do a lot of damage, and then you also, your 1 just basically does nothing. The actual hit of the damage, they're buffing, but it still doesn't do any damage, the Nene, and then it just gets one shot. It's basically just a thing on the map for ADCs to lifesteal, honestly, or even mages now with the lifesteal builds that people have. It's just a little turtle that people can lifesteal off of, so that's not good. Loki pretty good. One of the better junglers, I think. Not quite in that top tier of junglers, but I think still pretty strong. I would maybe throw him in A, actually. Less viable as a solo laner. He was really good with Rangdas, but assassins, like I said before, assassins are not as viable as solo laners now that Rangdas is dominating the meta. Bluestone, no longer that great on him because Bluestone's just not that great. So that kind of lowers his viability as a solo laner. So his flex pick potential is not as good. So I'd probably put him in A. If he was more of a flex pick, I'd have him in A+, but still not quite in that top tier of junglers just because he can't really build as Bruiser as these other characters, especially auto attack Bruiser. Not good with mannequins, not really good with any of the starter items, so that sucks. And then you can build Bruiser on him because he was viable as a solo laner, but it's not as potent as it is on these other characters that have a lot better setup, especially on supports. A lot of these other junglers can just kill supports pretty easily, or just tanky characters on the map. Loki, really not that great at that. Medusa, B+. Like I said before, most ADCs right now really aren't all that bad. I think all of them are decently viable and pretty good. And Medusa is more of a counter pick option. Still very easy to kill because her dash can be blocked. Not her block can be dashed, but her dash can be blocked. So that's one of the biggest things, the reason that she is being held back. Decent as a counter pick though is for like countering healing because she has anti-heal in her 3. Has that big CC immune ultimate, which is really strong. Can be really strong in the team fights. Can absolutely change the team fight. Has the attack speed starting on her 1, but it's only for 4 autos now, so not quite as good as other ADCs who get it for a lot more. So even though she does have an attack speed throw, it's not really that great when it comes to the build and having Silver Branch and everything. And then Transcendence Bluestone has fallen off a little bit on her, so not on her, just in general, it's fallen off as an ADC build, so you don't see her as much, but still okay, I would say. B+ probably where I'd have her. Mercury, very hard counter by Spectral, just a counter pick. He can run the game. If you're a good jungler, you can run the game with Mercury just by lane ganking people. You know, Murky is one of the only characters, if not the only character, besides maybe like Loki, I guess, who can invis past wards. He's one of the only characters in the game that can gank through wards because people aren't warding in the lane. You just walk up the lane and ult through the lane. So that's one big thing about him. And if you get enough of those off in the early to mid game, you can carry a game just by impacting the map so much. But very hard counter by Spectral because crit's pretty much the only viable build on him. And then also will be getting run down. Will easily be getting run down by all these meta junglers right now. So I would say he's probably B+. Merlin, A+, pretty strong mage, very good with all the items, can use pretty much any mage item in the game and do well. Like I said, it's all about throwing out tons of damage right now for these mages come mid to late game, and Merlin is a character that can do that pretty easily and still has his escape. No CC immunity, so that's why he's not quite as strong as he maybe was when he was just absolutely bloated damage-wise. And maybe that's part of the reason he's not as strong as some of these other mages, but still very, very strong because he does that. He does it pretty well. He can just throw out his damage from a distance and shred objectives. Mulan, in contention with one of the worst characters in the game. They've buffed her and they keep buffing her and she does stuff. She has numbers and she does things, but her animations are way too long. Her late game is horrible and she's just not worth it. I mean, she really is just not worth it. And the only reason this character is ever viable and the only reason you can pick this character in some games and do decent with her is because her damage numbers are just kind of ridiculous. They have to be ridiculous for this character to be decent. Like her damage, I think on her 2 and her 1 are like 120, 150 at level 1, which is like some of the highest in the entire game. So that's the only reason this character has good pressure early game and can kind of out pressure some people. But I don't know. They need to do something in this character. I think her 3 is probably one of the worst abilities in the game. It's so hard to hit and so hard to confirm. It's so unreliable, and that's only like decent CC. So yeah. Now you can cancel her ult, but that change just wasn't enough. And I don't know. It's sad because Mulan's kind of fun, I think. Not really though. Neith. I would say around B+ as well. Maybe kind of in contention for A because she can kind of be used as a flex pick, and she's pretty good as a flex pick, honestly. She can impact the side lanes, which is really big, especially in uncoordinated games because it's really hard for you to like play back for Neith ults and then you're just kind of playing up because you're fighting nonstop because you're trying to win and do your thing. She can impact that really hard. Only problem is Transcendence Bluestone not that great anymore, so that kind of fell off and that makes her fall off a little bit, but does have the attack speed started on her too now, so she can make use of the build, and I think pretty decent, honestly. Nem, I would say A tier, pretty decent jungler, still good with like a crit build, still good with like an auto attack build or even a damage like ability based build. Doesn't really matter. She's very versatile, can build all those things. Is actually pretty decent in a lot of the meta junglers, like good against Erlang. She's not that great against Osiris, but she's good against like Fenrir, stuff like that. She can kind of box them. She's one of the few assassins that actually can. So yeah, I would say pretty decent in the jungle right now. And also, obviously, auto attack junglers are pretty good. Stone cutting is pretty good. Nem can make good use of that. And mannequins is pretty good. And Nem, obviously, very good with that as well. So pretty good, I would say. A tier. Neja, B tier. I don't know what they need to do for this character. It's so weird. He's seen so many like different play styles. He used to be viable as a solo laner, as a support. They kind of nerfed that a ton because his healing on his 2 is really bad now because you need power for it to heal you for a lot. As a jungler, he just doesn't do all that much. They made his ult easier to beads, and that kind of made him dead, honestly, because before the potential late game was if you had a lot of damage and you were able to get your blink ult off on somebody and it was really hard for them to beads, you'd at least one-shot them, and then your late game is like worth it. But now it's just so easy to beads that it's not even worth it for the late game. So it's like, I don't know. This character is just not very good. Probably need to do something about it. Nike, I would say probably A tier. I think she's a viable flex pick. Very decent in solo. Pretty good in jungle, honestly, right now. With Mannequin, she has the AoE auto, so she can clear pretty well. She has a lot of pressure for that reason. And then even viable as a support, in my opinion. This character is actually pretty insane, and it's kind of crazy that she's even viable given that Sunder is so OP and there's 2 of them. People thought that the fact that, the new Sunder doesn't remove all of the shield would be a buff to Nike, but I actually think it's even more of a nerf because you can still get double Sundered as Nike, which will remove all of your shield, but it still removes all of your shield because what it does is it removes 50 on the base and then 75% on the upgrade. It removes that percentage of the shield, and then it does the damage after that, which does the damage to the shield, so you end up losing your shield anyway. It's a bit silly. And then, of course, having 2 of them is just insane. So if you miss one, you can always throw the second one on Nike. Or you can throw one at her and then throw one at somebody else on the map. So then it's even harder for her to die because 2 people are getting sundered. So, but given all that being said, it's still insane that this character is viable, and she's viable as a flex pick. And of course, I think one of the main reasons she's so viable is that she is very, very safe, has a ton of safety in her kit with her immunities, and her like blocks on her 2, her jump and everything. And then also just actually does a ton of damage. Very hard to like recognize how much damage she does. So, and obviously pretty good with mannequins, like I said, in the jungle. Nox, I would say B tier. Only reason she's not quite C tier is I think she's more of she could be kind of a flex pick. You could maybe see her a little bit in support and solo, honestly, as a little bit of a frontliner setup character. But yeah, this character is not that great. They've made some changes over the past couple of years, like her 1 does damage to minions now. Maybe that was the only thing. I guess they've buffed her damage here and there, maybe. But she just is her damage is pretty unreliable, and her ults can be body blocked. You can turn a corner and not get hit by it. You can wall it off with a lot of these wall characters that are meta. Like, it's just pretty rough. And obviously her dash is not a leap, and you can't leap over walls. You mirror counters, like yada yada. There's just so many characters that counter. And then of course you have to get your 2 on somebody, your 2-1 combo to actually do a lot of damage to them, which can be beads and just walked out of and stuff like that. So she is not a character that can just shit out damage. I think that's the first time I said it this video, but I'll say it. She's not a character that can just shit out damage from a distance and be super, super safe. Besides maybe her ultimate, but yeah, just not reliable when it comes to the damage. So a character that can put out some damage from a distance is Nuwa, and I think she's maybe a little bit underrated in the Mage meta. Does get out pressured a little bit in the early game. Can kind of get run down by like characters like Osiris and all that. So that's something to keep in mind. But maybe a little bit underrated. Makes really good use of the items like Soul Gem, Soul Reaver, Ratatouille, and everything like that. Can tank objectives for you, and there's a lot of objectives on the map and things that you can do right now, so that's something nice about her. But yeah, I'd say maybe her cooldowns are her biggest thing. She doesn't really do all that much damage if you're not bursting your minions with your 3, and then her 1 is pretty hard to hit on somebody from a range, so that's probably the main reason. But come late game, she is really, really good as a mage just because of her ultimate. So not that strong, just because her base abilities are pretty hard to do a lot of damage with. Odin S+, probably one of the best characters in the game right now. Obviously, probably, I say probably, but it's obvious if it's an S+. Kind of dictating the meta. A lot of characters that are batted to him aren't as good anymore because of Odin. Like, for example, I didn't talk about it, but Hebo, who might be a little bit better, is probably horrible because Odin is so sick into him, stuff like that. Something like Afro, which I think is maybe underrated, maybe isn't as underrated as I thought because of Odin, He's just so good right now. You kind of have to pick a ban around him. In your ranked games, you either should be banning this character or picking him. He's very, very good with the build in Soul Lane. He's viable as a support, as a jungle, and especially as a Soul Laner. If you go Bluestone on him, he's viable with that build. Even though Bluestone's bad, it's still fine on him. If you go Tier 2 Rangdas and then go Warrior's Axe, Sundering Axe late game is insane. If you go the build with Pridwin is insane on him. In fact, I think Pridwin might even be bugged on him because it does extra damage, I'm pretty sure, for some reason. Weird interaction with his 2 or something. But regardless, this character is dictating the meta. Very good in a lot of the meta picks. Can get a ton of value. Very, very strong with Blink Sunder, Blink Thorns. You don't have to go beads on this character a lot of time because he has so much immunity in his kit. Slow immunity and root immunity in his ult, and then knock-up immunity in his 3. You could just go on Magi's if you really need it. And you do plenty of damage late game for it to be worth it. And does not have any bad lanes besides maybe Osiris. And even then, it's really not that bad. So it's just like maybe Osiris is his worst lane, but most lanes he can survive. And if your surviving lane is Odin, you're going to do a whole lot. Oleron can be good with the items, but I guess we just talked about it, is never going to be good into Odin, considering he has knock-up immunity, so he's not going to get knocked up by Oleron. And then also has the cage to just lock down Oleron. Oleron in a pretty bad spot right now. The biggest thing I think about Oleron is that his passive is completely negated by Spectral. Isn't it pretty troll? A physical defense item, anti-crit item, is good against Oleron. Not only that, because the way Oleron's passive works, Spectral makes it so Oleron's crits don't even do extra damage. So if you have whatever amount of magical power you have on Oleron and you're hitting somebody for 200 and then your crit's supposed to hit them for what, 300, 320, I don't know, some random number, it will actually only hit them for 200. So your crits do the same amount of damage as your regular autos. Isn't that so troll? I think it's pretty troll. Osiris, S tier character, very good, very, very good as a Soul Laner and a jungler right now. One of the best junglers in the game, can just output so much pressure. Very good with mannequins. Very, very hard to 1v1. Can just dominate the early to mid game, insta clear camps. Very good around objectives, especially if you go a stone cutting build with him and go auto attack. He's good at tanking them because he's tanky. His natural tankiness with his passive. He's good at shredding them down with his stone cutting and just outputting a lot of damage with his auto attacks. Very, very strong right now. And kind of for the same reason, in line with Pele. Pele is not very strong because she gets countered by all these meta picks. Osiris, Erling, Serket, Fenrir, all 4 of these really high meta, very high pressure junglers just counter Pele a ton. So for that reason, she's actually in a really bad spot right now. Once these characters get out of the meta, or maybe the meta changes, she'll be a little bit better, especially if assassins are more viable in the jungle. But right now, just gets way too countered by these meta characters, and for that reason, very, very, very rough. And that's why she's B tier, because almost every single one of these games is going to have one of these characters. You do not want to pay Pele into it. Persephone's still not allowed in ranked because she's bugged, but I think this character is going to be S tier. The games I have played with her or against her, she just does a shit ton of damage. Very good with the items. Like I said, the items are kind of dictating the meta for mages, and just in general, they're kind of changing what people are playing in each role. And Persephone with her new 3 just does so much damage when you 3 and all 3 of those flowers come running at you. It's just insane. Her 2, like the little 2, like Chronos 1 kind of ability, does a ton of damage as well. It's really hard to juke, and it's very hard to like notice that it's coming. She is definitely a character that can put out a lot of damage from a distance. Still has her jump, which is really good for safety, and still has the CC immunity on her ult, and the ult impacts team fights still amazingly. And early, mid, late game doesn't matter. So this character will be S tier for sure. Poseidon, not as good. Is not a character that can shit out damage from a distance. He can maybe do it if he gets his Whirlpool Kraken off on some people, and it's good around in the objectives, so never really going to be that bad for that reason. Can kind of one-shot some characters, some support characters that aren't going to be expecting it, especially like a Fafnir when he comes out of his ultimate, boom, throw down your Whirlpool Kraken. He's going to get insta-kill when he transforms to his dragon. So that's one thing you can do on a character like this, but just not as good, especially with the items and especially from a distance like these other mages, so... Ra, I would say decent, you know. Even though he doesn't do nearly as much damage as these other mages come mid to late game with the items, he does have the benefit of being really, really strong around objectives because of his secure and the power he gives to his teammates with his 3 and the healing. And then also he has healing, and, you know, healing is obviously very, very good at most points in the game, so healing pretty good. You know, Ra will always be at least somewhat viable, and just like a safe character. The movement speed he gets from his passive, CC immunity on his ult, protections that he gets in his 3, all that, you know, he's pretty hard to kill, so something to keep in mind. Raijin, another S tier mage, puts out a ton of damage from a distance, very, very safe, can pick in every single game and not have to worry about it. You're going to do your job as a mage, and you're going to do it well as a Raijin. He's getting some nerfs in the next patch. I think his 2 is going down in damage, but I think he'll still be very good, and very, very good with the items. Karen's Coin, Soul Gem, Spear of the Magus. Not like, I'm not saying you build this exact build, but something like this. You know, items like that, Soul Reaver stuff, you know, you're just going to be feeling good. It's very, very strong on him. So Rama, I would say A+. This Hunter is being played even more and more now. Very good into Odin because he can go up into the air when Odin cages, but he can also destroy the walls pretty easily with his Astral Arrows because they count as 2, so it's good for him and his team. Very good at following up on dives, and, you know, there's a lot of dive characters right now, and he'll be really strong when it comes to just auto-attacking people with his steroid and the build and everything, but he also can go into the air and just make sure people die because of his ultimate and how hard it hits. I think Rama ultimate is one of the best ultimates in the game, especially when it comes to hunters and just like impacting team fights and changing the game. It makes an ADC who usually would be getting dove, like all these other ADCs just getting dove and having to turn on the frontliners, it makes it allow him to be able to dive the backline with his teammates, so it's pretty sick. Rat, unfortunately, I would say probably B, maybe B+, because he's more of a, I think he's viable as a flex pick when it comes to solo and support. I used to play a lot of solo Rat, and I think he's still viable there. The problem is you can't go tier 2 ranked as on Rat because he's an assassin, and that makes all assassin solos pretty rough. But then also he just gets out pressured by a lot of these other characters. He doesn't have as much pressure as he used to, and even if you use your ult for ganks and stuff like that, you're just gonna get run down by these high pressure characters like Fenrir, Osiris, Erlang, Serket, stuff like that. You're not even gonna win the 1v1 against them, so it's gonna be hard for you to even be full health for the ganks and everything. So something to keep in mind. But Rat definitely around B+. Robin, I would say A. You can kind of pick him in most games as a jungler and not feel too bad. Maybe gets run down a little bit and doesn't make good use out of like mannequins, so he's going to get out pressured a little bit. But he's good into a lot of these characters in the meta right now, just because he has the immunity and the jump. You know, with his ultimate, you can jump over a lot of abilities and just kind of run people down. And I think one of the few characters that maybe in the jungle is viable with different actives. Like, you don't have to go beads just because you have all that immunity like I talked about before. You could go, like, let's say you're against a Baba Yaga as a Robin. You could go Sunder and Sunder her when she's in her house and remove her shield. Not all of it, but do a lot more damage to her and remove the shield. So that's something that's nice about him. And I think just kind of like a balanced jungler, pretty good. Scylla got some nerfs because she was seeing so much play, especially around Worlds last year. So she's fallen off a little bit. Not as good with the items. I mean, she's actually not too bad with like Soul Gem and Karen's Coin and all that, but I would say falling off just because of her nerfs, honestly. It does a little bit less damage. And after she becomes meta, people pick characters that are a little bit better into her, don't get as easily hit by her ultimate, and then she falls off a little bit. So Cat, I've been talking about it all video, but definitely a very good jungler right now. Very, very hard to lock this character down. Very good with the build. If you go Jotun's Pridwin on her in the jungle, which a lot of people are building right now, you're tanky and hard to kill, but still do a ton of damage. Pridwin gives you a lot of damage because you're going to be going damage items or tanky items later on, so it's going to get even more shield and more damage. Very good early pressure, can gank lanes very easily, can kill anyone on the map because of the true damage on her ultimate, a percent damage on her passive, and just, you know, just the ability to initiate on pretty much anybody because of all of her CC and the fact that she's very hard to turn on because she's very hard to kill and lock down. So very good, and obviously good into a lot of these meta picks that have healing, such as like Terry, Emoto, stuff like that. Another meta pick that Subcat is get into, but you know, Set's still decent as a jungler, and I think viable as a soul laner as well. Fallen off a little bit, and I think it's because come late game, like I've been talking about the entire video, mages and ADCs, they one-shot people, they do a lot of damage, so it's really hard for Set to even go on them, especially if the enemy team buys like Cursed Onk or has any anti-heal. So when it comes to late game, it's very, very hard to dive as a Set, like as a full damage Set or even as a soul lane Set. You're gonna get one shot, and your only thing Set can literally do is dive. Like that's his only good thing. He has to do that. He only has damage. He has no setup CC or anything like that. So he has to do that. But in the early to mid game, it is very hard to fight a Set because he has so much healing and you don't have your anti-heal online yet. And he just gets so many procs of his ultimate. He does so much damage. So he's still pretty good in those scenarios. So you can snowball games with Set, especially if you get some good team fights in the mid game. Scotty B tier. Can't make any use of the meta builds. She's not good with crit, not good with Silverman. She doesn't have an attack speed steroid. Not even that great in a lot of the lanes, countered by a lot of meta characters. Odin, Fafnir, Fenrir, Osiris, like all these characters are going to run her down. She's just not worth it, has no benefit, not a good character. Honestly, probably C tier. Sobek, A tier, still good as a support, viable as a soul laner, cannot lose lane in solo. He literally cannot. He's pretty decent in a lot of meta picks like Artemis, stuff like that. The ADCs that usually want to be able to kill a frontliner, Sobek is going to make it hard for an Artemis to do that, so that's one benefit of him. But I would say his downsides are that he's really hard for him to PvE. He's not going to PvE like a lot of the other meta soul laners, so he's going to fall behind a little bit. And then also the late game, he doesn't quite put out enough damage to just one-shot people by his zone. You know, he's more of a setup character, and, you know, his animations are pretty long. Getting off your full ultimate through an Aegis and everything like that is pretty hard, so just doesn't do quite enough damage. But just a viable character. He has so much CC, very hard to lose lane, very hard to die on this character in support or solo. So for that reason, kind of A tier. Soul, I would say A+, another very strong mage, very good with Fafnir, who's very good in the meta right now. The items are really good with her, like the rings are still pretty good. Rajahiti's nice on her. The lifesteal build with Spear the Magus, Typhon, stuff like that, very sick on her. And then of course pretty safe as well because of her disapparate. And the change they made to her 2, they reverted it a little bit. They made it so you can instantly throw an auto after you throw out your 2. And then they just added a slight post-fire time to that. So you can still kind of do it. It's a little bit nerfed, but it's still very strong. And I think this mage, like some of the other mages right now, just, you know, maybe a little bit overtuned. Pretty good. A+. Wukong falling off quite a bit. I would say, honestly, B tier. This character is, I would say B+. So at the end of last season, this character was probably one of the better soul laners in the game. Now, the fact that you can go full tank builds with Mystical Mail, Pridwin, and Sundering Axe, you do so much more damage with Mystical Mail, Pridwin, Sundering Axe, and maybe even like a Sunder as your second active. You do so much more damage with that full tank build than you ever would do with the Wukong build with Soul Eater and all that. Now the thing is, I guess you could go the full tank build on Wukong and maybe put out some good damage, but Wukong just doesn't function as well as a full tank, honestly. A little bit better when it comes to those damage item builds and stuff like that. So not as good as he was, honestly, because the payoff just isn't there. Even when you get to that mid game where you're really strong with your full Soul Eater and stuff, you're not even doing more damage than these other characters. So it's not even worth it because a lot of lanes Wukong doesn't do too well in, especially against Cuckoo, Odin, Osiris. Like, he's going to get out pressured in these matchups. So the payoff isn't even there, even in these bad matchups. So, yep. Kind of the same reason. Susano, I'd say B tier. The payoff might be there late game, especially if you can get like a Hidden Blade online and one-shot people come late game if you go mannequins early. But he's going to get out pressured so hard by all these meta picks. Fenrir's going to destroy him Osiris is going to destroy him. Erling's going to destroy him. Even like something like a Loki is going to destroy him. The knockup immunity on his 3 is very good against Usano, so just gets countered way too hard, I would say. Sylvanas, another character that gets countered way too hard. Very bad into Odin. Okay, I'm just going to look at all these characters. He's bad into pretty much all 8 of these characters, 10 of these characters that I'm looking at right now. Output damage from a distance, especially like Raijin, Persephone are just going to one-shot him, not ever have to get close to him. Fafnir, Odin are going to lock him down, make him burn like the tree that he is, because, you know, Fafnir's going to have the shred on him, then the Odin's going to have the lockdown. Just not a great character, not good in the meta whatsoever, and honestly needs some changes, I think. Terra, I would say pretty good, one of the better supports in the game, maybe A+, maybe in contention for S. I'll throw her an A+ for now. Pretty good support right now. Lots of healing. Decent into the other support. She's good into Umoja. She's decent into Fafnir. You got to be careful getting locked down, but good into a lot of these characters that have knockups, because obviously she can't be knocked up with her passive, so something to keep in mind. And when I say characters that have knockups, I'm talking about like Morgan Le Fay, who is a very good mage right now. She's decent into because she can't be knocked up. So yeah, pretty good with the items. The fact that you can go Thebes into a damage item like supports, something they can do right now is go Gauntlet of Thebes, be really, really tanky with that, and then go straight into like a flat pen item. That's really, really strong for Terra, just because she does so much damage with her flat pen and her ultimates in team fights. So very, very strong as a team fighter, and healing is always strong. So Thanatos, I would say probably B+, more of a counter pick, and you'll see some junglers play him. He's decent early pressure, so he can kind of keep up with these other early game pressure junglers that are very, very prevalent that you probably, you know, want to pick around and decide your comp around. So that's fine. And, you know, Kepri's becoming more meta, and he's good into Kepri because the execute can't be revived, so that's nice. Decent with mannequins as well because he has an AoE auto, so honestly pretty decent. I wouldn't say he's quite A because he's very make or break based on whether you hit your 1 or not. It's very, very reliant on that. Morgan, I would say, is A tier, still pretty decent as a mage. Obviously going to be countered by stuff like Heim, you know, revealing the vision, revealing her on her 3. A lot of these other characters are also pretty decent into her. Kind of run her down early game, like these meta junglers that we've been talking about the entire video. Also does not output magical damage from a distance. She has to get up close to do it with her 1. And you're not really doing it a lot with throwing out your 2s. And a lot of times is it actually transforming into a physical. So I think the biggest downside of this character is that you're transforming into a physical. You're removing the fact that you could have a mage with 6 items just outputting a ton of magical damage from a distance, like I've been talking about. You're just kind of removing that factor. You could turn into their mage, I guess, if they have a decent mage, but you know, a lot of times it's not as practical in the actual game as it is in theory. So Thor is horrible right now, guys. He is so bad. Sam, probably one of the best Thors in the league, one of the best Thors of all time, can't even play him. And the reason for that is you just get run down. You just get run down way too hard. You cannot out 1v1 any meta jungler. He's not good with the builds. He's not good as a bruiser for the most part these days. Not viable as a soul laner. Just does not offer as much as these other characters. And if you build full tank, you're going to do so much more damage than a Thor ever would as a full tank or even as a bruiser. Very unreliable when it comes to his damage. It's very hard to hit your double tap without you know, any setup or anything like that. I don't know. This character is just pretty bad right now. Probably in one of the worst spots he's ever been, honestly. Thoth, a character that can do his damage from range, so that makes him at least somewhat viable. Is good with the items. Definitely good with the items. And, you know, the only reason this character isn't higher, just because he does so much damage from a distance, is that he's very, very easy to kill. His dash can be interrupted, has no CC immunity in his kit. Even though his dash can go pretty far, it's very easy to chase him down. Very bad into a lot of the meta characters. Can get locked in Odin Cage, for example. Like he's got some downsides, but the upsides are that he just has so much damage from a distance that you know, he's at least somewhat viable. Moving on to Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi's fallen off a little bit as a jungler. I think he's still pretty decent. The reason he's fallen off is that he doesn't make great use of the... I guess he's actually okay with mannequins because he has the AoE autos that proc it. But will get run down by the junglers. Isn't that great in the late game either because he doesn't do enough damage to one-shot the carries. And once he gets onto the backline with his ultimate, he'll just get one-shot by the carries, either the ADC or the mage, especially the mage. So that's one big downside of him. But still pretty decent. And obviously, I think... you know, he can kind of run around the jungle, clear everything, and only thing you got to be careful with Tsukiyomi right now is getting run down by these pressure junglers. Tyr falling off quite a bit. Bluestone is pretty much the only viable build for Tyr, and Bluestone falling off quite a bit. So B plus. I honestly always think this character isn't that great because he's just so useless in the late game. If somebody beads your fearless, there's just nothing you can, like, that's all you do. You blink fearless, and if they beads it, they're going to turn on you. Their ADC is going to start hitting you, and the only thing he's good at is just surviving because he's really tanky and he can kind of run away, ult away, and stuff like that. So that's the only thing he's good at. But Bluestone isn't that great. Doesn't do great into a lot of the meta picks now, especially like in Odin, and it's just not worth it in my opinion. Go F11 so this thing goes away. I should have been F11 the whole time, but I wasn't. Uller. I would say A. Pretty decent as an ADC right now. Can kind of make use of the meta builds. Is okay with crit. Was better with the Bluestone builds, and Bluestone's fallen off a little bit, but he can always do well in lane, and he can snowball a game just because he's so good in the 1v1. So that's something you got to keep in mind. Definitely something that is probably his biggest strength, and if you're ever going to pick him, that's why you want to do it. But no CC immunity in his kit, so he can always be countered by these CC heavy characters, and has his upside of high pressure, but downside of pretty easy to kill. So moving on to Vamana. Vamana pretty good. Even before with Benevolence, he was actually really strong. I think when Benevolence was the second item in every single game, A plus maybe on this character, but I'd say he's more A. Still very hard countered by Curse Donk come late game. If you get upgraded Curse Donk and they just turn on you, you will get one shot even with tank items and your ult going. Like, it's just absurd. You just take so much damage. But he's very, very strong with Animosity. And what you can do is you can just wait to build Animosity. You don't have to go Benevolence early game. You build Animosity late game, and you one-shot people. You don't one-shot them, but you run them down with your ult. You proc your Animosity, you auto-attack them, and you slam dunk them. You stomp on them, and you do a lot of damage. With a full tank build plus Animosity and a little bit of auto-attacks, like you throw in a Shogun's or a Talisman of Energy, maybe throw in a Toxic Blade for the 15 flat pen, which includes Magical Pen for your Animosity, and Animosity has magical damage, so stuff like that, he's actually pretty strong. In late game, he can deal with characters like an Artemis. He has long duration CC immunity for Artemis, so that's part of the reason I think he's pretty good. So yeah. Vulcan, I'd say B+, maybe a little bit underrated. Pretty good at objectives because of his turret, and has really good self-peel and very, very hard to lock down just because he has so much movement speed from his passive and good self-peel with his meatball throwing it on himself and bouncing people away and all that. They made a recent change to him, so his ult does more damage the closer you throw it. They used to do a lot less damage, but now it does a little bit more, so that's pretty nice. Good at securing objectives as well. Doesn't have that quite as much super reliable long range damage as a lot of the other meta mages, and I think a lot of these mages that are down here or in this area just are getting overshined by these power creep mages that we haven't even got to because they're at the end for some reason. So X-Ball, I would say B+, just not that strong. Very hard countered by Odin. Gets run down by characters like Fenrir, countered by stuff like Ares, just because of the chains for his 3. Like, not that great. His ultimate is pretty valuable when it comes to the team fights, especially in a competitive setting, but in most like ranked games and casuals, just not that great. Not any real reason to pick him over these other mage or other hunters. And obviously he has no steroids, so isn't that great with Silver Branch unless your teammates have Shoguns plus like Frenzy. Then you're not really going to be overcapping all that much unless you build all the attack speed items. Jing Tin actually pretty good right now. I would say A+, and the reason for this is that he's viable as a soul laner and as a support. We'll probably throw him in A though. He's good as a support because he's one of the few guardians or few maybe warriors or not warriors. He's not a warrior, but few frontliners, I guess you could say, that can deal with a lot of these characters, these mages that are very, very high damage output late game, and these hunters that are very high damage output late game. For example, Artemis. He's one of the few characters that can deal with them because he's really safe when it comes to late game because he can just jump away or he can use the CC immunity and throw people and go into the washer machine. So pretty strong there, and a lot of auto attackers right now in the meta when it comes like the Erling jungles and M jungles, the Osiris jungles, and then the ADCs when it comes to the dual lane and Fafnirs with the soul mids and stuff like that. Very good in those scenarios as a counter pick just because he's very good against auto attackers because of his 1 and the fact that he can live against them so easily. Yemoja, S+, still one of the best characters in the game in my opinion. At a pro level, you see this character either banned every single game or first picked every game. She is basically must ban. She is just ridiculous, so bloated still. Does everything you want a support to do and more. Can solo people with Sunder easily. Don't even have to have Sunder. You could probably still solo people. Her wall gets a ton of value against a lot of the meta picks. She has insane healing. Even though her 2 gives you a shield, it still does insane healing. Plus her passive autos healing. This character is way too much. Way too bloated. Power creep to all hell. She's one of my favorite characters. Probably my favorite character in the game, honestly. But I'll tell you, and I'll be honest and objective and say unbiasedly that she is probably top 3 characters in the game. Ymir, another really good support. I would say S tier. Viable as a flex pick as well, in my opinion. I think he's actually kind of viable in solo, and maybe even viable as a jungler. He one-shots the camps with mannequins and stuff, and has a lot of pressure, can 1v1 people. Early game is really strong. But still one of the best supports in the game. His wall gets a ton of value against most meta characters. You kind of have to pick jumps against him or you're just going to get destroyed by his wall. Very, very tanky. They've buffed him so much over the years that his numbers are pretty insane these days, and one of the better supports in the game. One of the worst mages or characters in the game is probably Zeus. I think he's actually B tier, not quite C tier. I kind of see Zeus as like this character that can get some value in some scenarios, with like a bruiser mid build where you go like a ton of health, warlocks, pythags, and stuff like that. It's going to be pretty hard to dive a Zeus, especially if you go those items with like a little bit of lifesteal. He's going to heal a lot, and it's going to be a little bit hard to dive him. But still no CC immunity, and if you get enough people on him, he'll just die, and he's not worth it over these other mages. For, again, the same reason as before, the meta is pretty cut and dry, pretty set in stone. If you don't do a lot of damage from a distance, and you're not safe, then it's pretty hard for you to be viable. And Zeus kind of does a lot of damage from a distance, but not really from a distance. He can, once you go around a wall, it's really hard for Zeus to get his damage off. He does no damage through the walls besides his ultimate, and I guess if you detonate. And then, of course, is not safe at all, so. Zhang, pretty good, honestly. One of the better mage solos right now, probably the best mage solo. Also is viable in mid. If you go Sacrificial Shroud on this character, go Vampiric for the early game, you're very, very hard to kill in the mid game, or in the mid lane. You're also very hard to kill in soul lane. If you go Sacrificial when you're a mid laner on this character, you do so much damage late game. If you go full lifesteal, full damage, and Sacrificial, you one-shot people late game. You can kind of just like dive bomb them with Blink in the mid lane. And then if you're playing it solo, if you go like a tanky bruiser build, you do a lot of damage and are very, very hard to kill, very hard to gank early game. You win almost every single lane because Vampiric plus Tiny Trinket, you get a ton of sustain from that, and you out pressure, out clear, in one shot pretty much everybody in the early game. So, all right, and the last two mages, and I guess this is perfect. I guess we'll just throw them both in there. I was gonna do this entire video, and they were saved for last because I think they're the most recent characters, and I think this person who made the tier list just put them last. I guess, actually, wasn't it? I think Gilgamesh came out, and then Morgan Le Fay. I'm not really sure, but regardless, both these characters are S+. Both do a ton of damage. Both are very, very hard to kill. Morgan Le Fay has a ton of self-peel. Is slightly countered by Odin, but it doesn't matter. You get so much movement speed from your 3. The knockup that you have on your 2 is so potent. Maybe not against Odin because he has knockup immunity on his 3, but against every other character in the game, the knockup immunity is insane. I guess maybe except against Terra as well. I said that before, but ultimate movement speed as well. You're so hard to kill. The healing you get from your ult is insane because it's a percentage of your missing health. So if you ever get low, you go into your ultimate and hit people with that, and you're going to be healing a ton. Very hard to lock her down. Puts out a ton of damage, especially from a distance. You throw out your 1. Her 1 is a mini Hunbat's ult. Let's be honest. It's literally a Hunbat's ult. It's insane. This character is very, very strong and top pick, top ban right now. If you're a mid laner, you should learn how to play this character and win games with it, in ranked especially, get your MMR and all that. And then moving on to Tiamat for the same reason. This character, I mean, she just does everything, and she builds full damage. Is tankier than me as a soul laner. She's literally tankier than me as a full damage mage, and that's what they did. They made that change so that the more damage you build, the more damage mitigation you get, so that you can't just build full tank and just be even tankier. You know, they made it scale off your power, so that's okay, but it's still absurd how tanky this character is. She has an ability up for every situation. Late game, her scaling is ridiculous. Even though she has a million abilities and is supposed to be like this tanky, like pseudo tank character, for some reason her 1 or her tornado on her ultimate literally one-shots you if you just get hit by like 2 ticks of it. It doesn't make any sense. That's really a tick ability, and it hits harder than most mage abilities in the game. Yeah, as long as you learn how to play this character, one thing you have to keep in mind with Tiamat is early game, your pressure is a little bit rough, and you kind of want to stay in your range form. You don't really ever want to transform into your melee form in the early game. But if you just stay in your range form and farm up and get to those items, like your 3rd or 4th item, team fights are going to be insane with this character. She does so much. And one of the biggest things, I think one of the reasons that she is so strong is that you can still throw your minions down in the mid to late game in a side of the map that people aren't going to be on. It's going to push the waves, and you're going to get XP and gold from it. You're literally getting the XP and gold while no one's there, while you're all focused on like pyromancers, fire giants, gold furies, and stuff like that. You're getting XP and gold while you're sitting there jerking each other off at objectives, and you get so far ahead from that. And it allows you to split push because it gets your team ahead. It's just so strong. And then you get your items, and like I said, you get your items sooner, then you're hitting harder. And like I said, your abilities hit harder for some reason. You just hit really, really hard because our scaling is insane. So that's all I gotta say. So yeah, Tiamat is S+ tier. For some reason, this doesn't look like every god in the game, but I guess I guess it is. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it is every god in the game. Maybe there's something missing. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but anyway, that is the tier list that appears. Seems like every god is taken. So we finish it in an hour and 30 minutes, probably the fastest we have ever done a tier list. I tried to speed run it, tried to vocalize my opinion on every single god and why they are where they are. And hopefully I explained it in well enough detail about each god and where they are. So the meta, very dictated by builds right now. The junglers are in a pretty rough spot. They're basically just pressure bots that have to run the early game and dominate with like mannequins a lot of the time, kind of gank lanes and impact the lanes. ADCs and mages are insane late game. They get their items so quick. The game has been sped up so fast because of the removal of boots and all the farm on the map that these characters just get to their late game form very, very quickly. Soul laners are pretty much dictated by how well they can use Rangdas plus Warrior's Axe. Assassins aren't viable for that reason, and their late games are actually pretty good. Late game Soul laners aren't that bad right now because of Sundering Axe and the access to like Thorns and the good Sunder. And then supports are pretty much dictated by the best characters: Fafnir, Yemoja, Terra, and Ymir. Those 4 supports are the best 4 supports in the game. You should probably pick one of those every single game you are a support in your ranked games, the competitive games, your casuals, if you want to win. And yeah, that covers every role. So that's a quick overview of the meta. The characters right now, as you can see where they are, this is my opinion. And like I said at the beginning of the video, a tier list is just a reason for me to talk about characters. And I kind of see this as like the S plus are the best characters, and then going down, it goes from best to worst for the most part. And B plus is more of like a counter pick area. Very good in those counter pick scenarios for the most part. And yeah, take everything I said with a grain of salt. You should take every tier list you ever watch with a grain of salt. So yeah, that's all I got to say. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully the speed run was worth it. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. And I love you all. So stay safe and healthy as always. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out. Bye-bye.